Hello learners, I am Dr. Sunita Dhal, faculty with the School of Gender and Development Studies, IGNOU. Today we are going to discuss Unit 9, that is on Gender, Environment and Energy. Today is the introductory lecture for this unit, and it is going to flesh out or discuss some of the interlinkages between gender, environment and energy. What are the learning outcomes? After watching this video, you will be able to explain the relationship between gender, environment, sustainability issues, and energy security. Briefly discuss the impact of climate change on gender and analyze the relationship between energy security and gender considerations. Let us relook at what is understood by gender. I know you learners are already familiar with the concept of gender. However, before we discuss sustainability issues with gender, let's look at some of the key points. What is the meaning of gender? Gender discusses the power relationship between women and men. It is socially constructed and not determined by biology. And gender discourses in development has enabled us to understand the interface between gender, energy, and sustainability. So when we are talking about sustainability issues, I know in the contemporary context, the world over, we are facing environmental crisis, and therefore the question of sustainability becomes important. The connection between gender and sustainability begins with environmental concerns, instrumental and ethical reasons scholars have argued. What is instrumental reason? Instrumental reasons reflect on sustainability issues. For instance, every human experiences are different. Like if you really look at UN Conference on Human Environment in the year 1972 and UN Conference on Environment and Development in 1992, these two conferences focus, and primarily the Rio Conference focuses on the sustainability issues for the future generation. Ethical reasons examines the gendered manifestation of environmental change or injustice, and therefore gender plays here an important role. What are the theoretical discourses through which we can actually offer a theoretical lens or conceptual framework to understand the interface between gender, climate change, or sustainability issues? One approach is feminist epistemology, and I think we have dealt with feminist epistemology in in Unit 2 of this particular course when we are talking about gender in science. So feminist epistemology challenged the androcentric character of science. So what is science? What is growth? What is economic growth? So these questions had been challenged. Then we bring to the intersectional research. Intersectionality coined by Kimberly Cronshaw in the year 1989. Well, we're looking at the power differentials across social categories, caste, class, ethnicity, religion, disability, sexuality, and so on and so forth. Ecofeminist position, which we are going to discuss in detail, and feminist ecological perspectives, where gender offered a critical lens to the dominant notions of environment and sustainability debates. The Beijing Declaration in the year 1995, that is the Fourth World Conference on Women, was committed to poverty eradication on the basis of sustained economic growth, social development, environmental protection, and social justice. Feminist scholars thereafter expressed their uneasiness with domination narratives about environment and challenged the mechanistic view of the world, or the question is development or can development be measured only through economic growth and progress? This was the question which was challenged post the Beijing Declaration in the year 1995. What are feminist approaches to understand sustainability issues? What are these issues? What are these approaches? Women, environment and development approach, that is called WED approach, which emphasized women's knowledge and skills in terms of preserving local knowledge, conserving forest, maintaining the local biodiversity. Ecofeminist position highlights women's centrality to resource management and conservation. Ecological movements also contribute towards addressing the issues of sustainability in the context of gender Environment and Climate Change, which saw how science and technology were never gender neutral. And feminist political ecological position looks at the power relations or the power dynamics between women and men. SDG 5, Sustainable Development Goal 5, where we are focusing on gender empowerment and equality, became the central principle of achieving SDG. What are various reports indicate? One is that gender is a factor of vulnerability, which was recognized post Beijing conference. Also, had been seen as a factor of vulnerability in climate change, disaster, food and energy security. The report, for instance, Facing a Changing World, Women, Population and Climate in the year 2009, reveals how 3.4 billion women and girls can't be seen as victims of the climate crisis. Or now we not only we can talk about climate crisis, but it is a climate emergency when we are looking at the climate or the ecological condition of today's world. The UNFPA report focuses that, and I quote, current climate models indicate food prices may increase sharply by 2050. In India, more than 84% of women are involved in agricultural activities, and certainly since there is more of feminization of agriculture, so any kind of climate change will impact the women differently vis-a-vis men. We have entered into an Anthropocene age where we are experiencing climate change, floods in Thailand, Ladakh, the forest fires in Asia and now in the USA, like Los Angeles in California, and intense cyclone and hurricanes even in different parts of the globe. Loss of biodiversity is there, and between 3 and 300 species have also been extinct. So, how do we understand the gender differential impacts, particularly when we have entered into this Anthropocene age? Natural disasters occurred in 141 countries from 1981 to 2002, lowered the life expectancy of women. Women and children are 14 times more likely to die than men during natural disaster and are otherwise disproportionately adversely affected by any kind of disaster or climate change. Food insecurity or energy insecurity due to disaster affect women the most as they eat least and they eat leftover food. How do we integrate gender linkage in the context of sustainability? So there are, Krishna argues that there are different ways where we can actually integrate gender into sustainability debates or sustainability issues. Sustainability context is important, where we are going to look at issues of climate change, renewable energy technology, natural resource management, community forestry and agriculture. And let us look at, since you are students of gender studies, like you are reading or doing a paper on gender science technology, it's also important to understand some of the theoretical positions. How do we actually look at gender and environment debates? One of the significant position is ecofeminist position. Ecofeminism primarily challenges the forces of globalization, issues of reductionism, the mechanistic view of science, the attitude to conquer nature as expression of capitalist patriarchy, which is argued by Maria Mies and Vandana Shiva. It combines feminism with green movements or ecological movements. Conventional approach identified gender biases in economic process and resource management. For example, invisible task women and girls, they undertake within the household. Unequal share of benefits also could be an example where we could see that there is an existing gender bias in access to resources. Celebratory approach symbolizes women with nature. It's a Gandhian way of looking at the metaphor between drawing drawing a symbolism between women and nature, associating women with biological, emotional and intuitive capacities. Gendered approach, which is proposed by Krishna and challenge the dualism that exists between women and men. It seeks to question the cultural construction of masculinity and femininity. For example, what kind of metaphors that we draw, through our stories or myths about masculinity and femininity. Similarly, what kind of traits that we associate in us in our society with masculinity and femininity. So it is about it is about a cultural construction. It began to realize that both women and men can have the capacity to manage resources. So it is not about that there is a way, like, women are more interested to conserve the nature. However, as human, as taking a humanistic approach, both women and men, they have the capacity to manage the ecological resources, and addressing women's specific needs becomes significant in the realm of environmental crisis and disaster. So now let's come to energy issues. So why do we incorporate gender when we are talking about energy security? One factor is women's dependence on rural energy sources is high due to their differential gender roles. Women are the users, providers, and managers of rural energy, and many of us might have seen that in our villages, in our communities, and how women are actually the provider of fuel and food. Factors like climate change, environmental depletion, and joint forest management have intensified the challenges of women's access to household energy. In a way, the industrialization also, like in agricultural industrialization, also contributed in terms of women's access to productive resources. So also contributed towards women's inaccessible to productive resources. So also and it has an impact on women's access to household energy. Why does gender matter in energy planning? So we know that how do we incorporate gender? Formulating energy policies in different countries or in different states. And at the same time, why does gender matter in energy planning? So gender inequalities are pervasive in developing world, and so also in developed world as well. So gender specific vulnerabilities are increasing: low access to education, technology and healthcare. Gender based violence is increasing, and women in particular are traditionally excluded from policy formulation. Nearly 1/3 of the world's population lacks access to energy efficient services. Differential impact on women and men of climate change and international energy policy needs to be articulated in the national and regional debates. Gendered implication of climate change and energy policies need to be explored and integrated into mitigation initiatives. So while drawing the interlinkages, like we could look at some of the issue is some of the data, like around 70% of women are below poverty line, and energy access is closely related to poverty, and energy use can be the parameter for socio-economic development. So we were earlier talking about in terms of access to resources. We were talking about access to productive resources, food security. Then we moved from food security to nutritional security. And as now we are talking about, like in India and across the globe, we are talking about energy access. So when we are talking about energy use, this should be one of the important parameters for socio-economic development. And therefore in India, the Ujjwala scheme has really benefited women in the rural areas and in different parts of the country. Unavailability of commercial energy creates burden on women, like collection of water, fuel, wood, and food. So, in absence of commercial energy, it has added the burden on women in terms of as women as providers of fuel and food. Increasing burden on human energy creates nutritional scarcity among women and children. Therefore, we need to incorporate gender while planning or formulating an energy policy. Women's dependence on rural energy sources is high due to their differential roles. Women are the users, providers, and managers of rural energy. Factors like climate change, environmental depletion, and joint forest management have intensified the challenges of women's access to household energy. Early policy intervention was to introduce energy efficient stove, which can reduce indoor air pollution, accidents within the household, and health hazards for women, which was invisible, like invisibly understood by within the household. However, the visibly it was, like women and having, cooking every day in a stuffy kitchen will create health hazard was something which was not accepted within the society, because due to patriarchy or due to the social construction that women are responsible for the household labor or providing the food. Gender sensitive energy policy needs to address, therefore, women's concerns, taking into account how much time they spend on fuelwood collection, particularly in countries like Africa and in India. Gender equality activists and scholars demanded for energy efficient technology and services that can make women self-sufficient. Women, like in Tamil Nadu, we have the Women Technology Park. So, women are seen as victims of energy scarcity. The data on women as energy producers is lacking, because it is now time to collect gender disaggregated data, where we really need to look at women as energy users or end users of energy, and women even as energy entrepreneurs at the local level. Women's knowledge, need, and their priorities are important to address when we are talking about women's empowerment. Therefore, the role of network is also important. Women's role as energy producers and managers need to be documented in policy papers. Multi-sectoral energy programs required to be developed by the state or for household, transportation and manufacturing sector. Policy gap exists in encapsulating the interrelationship between gender and energy, like role of women in agriculture. So, what kind of energy that use can build the capacity of women in terms of making them more productive is also it can be one of the examples. So, where there is a gap that exists, when we are looking at sectors like agriculture, sectors like health, it is important for us to build in or document. Case study and research and experiences of women in cookstop social forestry need to be encouraged, like cooperative transportation, management of community forest by women, and the best practices can be documented. And many international organizations and local civil society organizations in local those who are working with the local community are also documenting many research and their experiences of women with energy technologies. Increasing the critical mass of women's participation in energy planning is the need of the hour. And finally, the gender disaggregated data on where do women stand in relation to men in energy use and energy decision making is something it's important for the policymakers to think about. Promotion of science and technology research grant for documentation of successful energy technology intervention could one of the recommendations. Identifying the challenges for women to be involved in energy sector, like lack of education, consultation and participation in energy project is also could be one of the recommendations to go forward and or to integrate or to address gender needs in energy planning. Facilitate women's access to information and training to make informed choice as women as end users of energy and women as energy entrepreneurs or women as innovators. Finally, we are concluding with looking at some of the gendered climate policy, which are the golden rules that one can follow. One is recognize the vital urgency of gender equality in climate change issues. ensuring women's participation in all decisions related to climate change, ensure gender mainstreaming in all institutions dealing with climate change, collect and polish gender disaggregated data at every level, undertake gender analysis of climate change policies and policies with regard to energy, establish measurable gender related targets, develop gender sensitive indicators, design outreach program, capacity building, education and training programs across different nation states, invest in gender training to sensitize both women and men in in different organizations, civil society groups, and within the community to take informed choice when it comes to energy issues, ensure that adaptation and mitigation strategies support basic human security. These golden rules were proposed by Gender CC Network in the year 2009. And what could be the directions of future research? And with this, I would like to conclude today's lecture. One could be, these directions for future research can give learners or students a kind of questions that you are going to think about critically, look at, for future, or while analyzing some of the current issues, environmental issues of today. One is application of gender analysis methodology to collect disaggregated data on energy use pattern and its access. Women as managers of renewable energy resources needs to be understood in a social context. Evaluation of microenergy programs becomes essential. And these are some of the references which you can go through. The references are listed here in this lecture, and I hope you like the lecture and more to go in detail in our forthcoming lectures on gender, environment, energy and climate change. With this, I thank you. Thank you so much.